and they experience it as an attack to their own masculinity, as an attack to their own also maleness. Whereas women experience rape, okay, of course, as a shame, but most importantly, I think the experience of rape can lead for women into pregnancies, okay? And this has been one of the difficult issues in the Bosnian War. Now, I give an example here. In 2005, a young Israeli woman, Idal Khalili, refused to serve in the Israeli army and connected her refusal with a feminist anti-military stance. She also comes from a feminist organization. In her petition for exemption from service, she argued that, quote, the military promotes sexual harassment, a patriarchal power structure, and conformity to masculine roles. She won the case in the sense that after spending 2 weeks in the prison, she was declared unfit to serve. Therefore, widespread media attention, and other refuseniks came out with the support of their new profile organization. Many also refused to serve in the occupied territory, mostly women, but there were also some men after this incident, which developed a very big discussion in the Israeli society. Thus, the liberal and neoliberal view on equality in the military needs to be complicated and connected to sexism, ethnicity, patriarchy, gender, and governing ideologies expressed as these are expressed in values, cultures, and attitudes. So, in a way, the liberal and neoliberal view of gender and war is very simplistic and has been challenged. Now, postmodern feminists see gender roles in armed conflict and peace building as fluid, contextual, and arbitrary. They're not static, they move. Do not see women merely as victims and passive, but also as active agents. And we have many examples where women have really shown this, both in times of actual hot conflict, but especially later in reconstructing their societies and in peace building. And postmodern feminists refrain from essentializing men and women's social categories, and they recognize that men are vulnerable and can be victims, raped and abused as well. So de-essentializing also some of the stereotypes about women. Rebel women can also be cruel and cold-blooded fighters, as was in Sierra Leone. Aminata said being able to fire a gun made her feel strong and fearless, which could have been her own motivation in order to keep going. But she explained the actual killing of people did not make her feel good. So again, it's complicated when people are asked to fight or to kill. Is not a very easy choice. And we have many examples, as Coburn gives us a lot in her latest book. Now, transactional feminists is another group of feminists who have broadened now the discussion on gender-based violence, specifically sexual violence. So feminists in a way come to tell us that violence should be looked at all its dimension, starting from the domestic violence, sexual violence, physical violence, and of course all the abuse in times of war. They address the complex intersection of race, sex, ethnicity, class, age, and sexuality in the lives of women of color, third world women, And here they try to tell us that we must be careful not to use a very Western or Eurocentric approach of looking at the experiences, especially of women from third world countries or women who have experienced colonization, because many European women come with perspective which excludes many of the experiences of these groups. Okay, and standpoint feminism, it tells us that patriarchal gender relations are seen to be intersectional. This is now, it's been used a lot in the analysis of gender with, in conflict situations. So how does this intersection work with economic and the ethno-national power relations in perpetuating the armed conflict? So in other words, the standpoint feminism tells us that for conflicts to be perpetuated and to be dragged on and on, there are also other issues there, such as the ethno-national power relations, but also economic power, which was not in our analysis before. So the feminism generated in anti-war activism tends to have a holistic conception of power and legitimates change from below and from subjects who are subjugated. So the standpoint feminism agrees very much that change should come from the below up, okay, to mobilize grassroots and women from below. Okay. We also know about that knowledge is situated, knowledge is gendered, and if we look around or look at the books we teach in our schools, the books we read in our universities and so on, who writes these books, okay? And what kind of perspectives are there? We need to address also what kind of experiences are visible and what kind of experiences are invisible. So the standpoint feminism asks the anti-war movement to recognize that to be substantially peaceful, a society will also have to be one in which we live gender differently from the way it is lived today. So in other words, we need to, we cannot have peace, in other words, here, Cynthia Coburn tells us, without changing also the gender relations. Now, gender dynamics are by no means the whole story yet, tells us Connell. The concentration of weapons and the practices of violence among men, gender patterns appear to be strategic. Masculinities are the forms in which many dynamics of violence take shape. Thus, a strategy of peace and demilitarization must include a strategy of masculinities. In other words, the way we construct our femininity or our masculinity is a strategy. It's a social strategy. And in order for us to construct a society which is peaceful, without much violence, Connell tells us we also need to deconstruct the way we build our the masculinities and femininities today. So a theory of war and armed conflict and their causation is flawed if it lacks a gender dimension, as this intersects with the different forms of coercive power and forms of violence. So in other words, we need to go deep and look at the real causes of these forms of violence, and the gender dimension by itself is not enough, Connell tells us. So why do we need a feminist and gender analysis? It allows us to identify the nature of existing power relations between men and women in a particular society, and to understand how conflict and its aftermath affect these relations. Today we cannot really have any new policies in post-conflict societies without looking at what would these new policies do for the lives of men and for the lives of women. We need to bring in this perspective. Also, this analysis helps us highlight the fact that marginalized groups who do not readily conform to female and male stereotypes, such as male pacifists and women in the military, experience discrimination and conflict in diverse ways. Therefore, in our peace-building processes and policies, we need to include this information, these groups and their rights. It allows also for a more nuanced understanding of how women fulfill multiple roles simultaneously, affect gender relations in the household and society. This again is much taken outside. It's not considered after a conflict, because after a conflict what we've observed is that women are sent back to the home. Although they've been active participants and contributors to the peace-building processes after the and we've seen this with the so-called Arab Spring. Women were in the squares, were active participants, and now where are they? Okay, they are becoming invisible. So where war, says Coburn, exacerbates women's suffering in their roles as mothers, nurturers, and caregivers, and account for a large proportion of civilian casualties. Already we said this. Now, furthermore, it highlights the crime of rape and sex trafficking during and after the conflict. We have many examples here. It promotes the need for gender mainstreaming in all policies and laws affecting women's and men's lives. It reveals, most importantly, the absence of women from decision-making bodies, and statistics here abound worldwide, and views this as a barrier to women's participation in public life and economic development.